Hey guys, welcome to Tall Tales with Taco. My name is Mitch Taco Bell. I'm your host. Listen, tonight is a banner moment. I am speaking with two of my favorite Marines. One, Randy Norfleet. He was in my squadron. I should say I joined the squadron after him, so I was in his squadron. We were good friends at VMGR 252 on the East Coast at Cherry Point. We spent many a trip together out on the road, including one long week in lodges, Azores during the wintertime with 70-mile an hour blowing, freezing winds, and just good memories of sitting talking about stuff. My other friend, Dr. Doug Hanning, is my son's teacher at our local school, and Doug was a young Marine back in '95, and his story is just as incredible as Randy's. So, guys, I'm going to bring you on without further ado. Randy, Doug, how
Hey,
are you?
good,
Okay.
good evening.
Hey, listen, first of all, I appreciate you all coming on to talk about this. And Randy, I know you have given, there's many testimonials to your experience in Oklahoma on that day, April 19th, 1995. But there's not many testimonies where you're going to be able to tell your side, and then we get to hear the perspective of a young Marine that rushed into the building to go help and kind of fill in some of the blanks as I was alluding
Oh,
to in the
yeah,
show.
this is going to be exciting, Mitch, because when you're in an experience like that, you get real tunnel vision, and being able to bring in a separate experience like this is going to be really awesome.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, kick off. Um, April 19th, 1995, Oklahoma. Springtime feels good, nice weather. You start off with a
Sure.
prayer group that morning, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So at the time, I was an officer selection officer in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and running the Marine Corps officer programs there for Oklahoma, for RS Oklahoma City. And anyhow, that morning, the morning of April the 19th, I had been invited to a prayer breakfast there at the Myriad Convention Center in Oklahoma City. And so I was at the time living in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I had driven down to Oklahoma City for a prayer breakfast, and it was a wonderful prayer breakfast. The governor of the state was there, and a lot of community leaders were there at the Myriad Convention Center. And anyhow, we kind of wrapped up about 8:30 in the morning that morning, and by the time I got to my vehicle, I was driving a black Ford Ranger pickup truck, and it was just about maybe a quarter to nine, 10 minutes to nine, and I thought, I'm not in Oklahoma City very often, and my commanding officer is here in Oklahoma City. Let me go get some FaceTime with the CO, and maybe I can pick up some free supplies from the supply gunny, and then head back out to the field and start recruiting again on the college campuses. So as I was driving from the Myriad Convention Center to the Oklahoma City Federal Building, um, maybe some of y'all have been to what's now the memorial, and there is a light right in front of the west side of the memorial where it's got the 9:01 a.m. Um, uh, facade there, and there's a light right in front of that. And so I had stopped at that red light, and as I was looking at the Oklahoma City Federal Building, I I'm sorry, I had some feedback. Anyhow, so as I was stopped at that red light, I noticed there was this yellow Ryder truck that was parked in the loading zone right in the front of the building. And I thought, wow, that's kind of strange, but not too strange because the MEPS was there, the Army was there, the Navy was there, the Marine Corps was there, and so I thought this is just some sergeant that's checking into the command. He's going to
Yeah.
get his orders, and he doesn't know where to park, so he's just parked there. Well, the next thing that happens, as I'm thinking that, the door opens on the truck, and this guy jumps out of the truck, and he's got cami bottoms on, and he's got a t-shirt. And I go, well, there must be the sergeant, staff sergeant that's moving in. But instead of going into the building, he ran away from the building. He ran across the street and down the road. And I thought, well, that's unusual. Why in the world that's kind of unsat, right? Why would he park his truck there and then leave it and run away from it? And so anyhow, yeah. Yeah, there you go. So anyhow, about that time, the light changed, right? And so I put my truck in gear, and I went and I parked right in front of the Yellow Rider truck, but in a legal parking space, right? So I was the good captain, right?
So he was
And I
double
parked.
parked. He was double parked in front of the entrance.
Yeah, that's right. He was illegally parked in the entrance there. And so I get out of my truck and I walk right behind this Yellow Rider truck, and I go into the building. And normally the federal building is pretty busy 8, 9 o'clock that morning, and or so, just a couple of minutes before 9. And anyhow, I walked into the building, and believe it or not, this morning the elevator doors were open. So I just went right straight in the elevator. I pushed the 6th floor because the Marine Corps command was on the 6th floor. And I went straight to the 6th floor. So I get off at the 6th floor. And normally, before I go see the CO, I would, straighten up my uniform a little bit and stop by the head, straighten up my uniform, and then I go in. But for some reason this morning, I just went straight into the operations center there of RS Oklahoma City. And the first man that I met, or the first Marine that I met, was a Sergeant Benjamin Davis. And he was married, had a young daughter, and he had just finished school. And we had been working him through the MESEP program. And so the MESEP board had met the day before, and the results were out, right? And we knew this, but this was back in '95, so we didn't have email. They hadn't faxed it out yet. So I as I came in, Sergeant Davis said, "Captain Norfleet, you know what? Can you call Headquarters Marine Corps and find out if I got selected to go to Officer Candidate School?" And so anyhow, so I call I sat down at the OPSO's desk there, and I called Headquarters Marine Corps. And this was back in '95. I got a busy signal, right? So I know a lot of people that are listening to this may not be old enough to remember, but that's back when we didn't have voicemail. And so I just got a busy signal. So I hung the phone up, and I looked across to Sergeant Davis, and I said, "Sergeant Davis, give me 10 minutes. I'm going to go talk to the commanding officer, and then I'll come back, and we'll call Headquarters Marine Corps again and find out if you were selected to go to Officer Candidate School." So I got up from the desk, and as I was one, I was going to go to the supply office, and I went into the supply office, and I started talking to our supply sergeant. His name was Sergeant Tad Snydecourt. And so, and then also in there was Gunnery Sergeant Bustle was with us too. And so I sat down in the chair looking at him, and I was facing the front of the building. And I had my satchel, my bag in my right hand. And just about the time that I sat down in that chair, and a lot of us already know this story, that Yellow Rider truck, that Timothy McVeigh was that man that jumped out, and inside of that truck was a 5,000-pound fertilizer bomb. And he had set a timer on it, and that timer, or a fuse, and he had set that fuse on there, and that fuse finally reached and detonated that 5,000-pound fertilizer bomb. So the first thing that happened to me is that I'm facing the glass facade of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, and that glass facade just shatters, right? And so what happens is I take a big shrapnel of glass, and it just kind of lodges in my right eye and it fillets my right eye open, right? And at the same time, I had put my left arm up and I took a bunch of shrapnel in my left arm, and that saved the sight in my left eye.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, after that was happening, I remember Sergeant Snydercourt going, "Oh wow, we've had a gas main explosion," right? Because that's what we first thought that it was. And but because of the concussion of the bomb, I had kind of grayed out. You know, and you and I know what that means, Mitch. But what that means is I was still conscious, but I couldn't see, right? Because the G forces on that bomb had kind of taken my vision away from me, so I couldn't see anything while all this was happening. But I know that I was probably sitting just 2 or 3 feet away from the support columns that were supporting the building. And if you've seen a picture of the Oklahoma City Federal Building when it was still standing, you'll notice that they just had one section of the building was still left standing after that bomb went off. And
Yeah.
what happened, oh, there's a picture. So you can see there on the left side of the screen, or I see it's my right side, you can see that there's that one column that is still left standing, right?
Right.
And so I was about 2 feet, 3 feet from where that column sheared off. And so what happened is as that building collapsed and sheared off, the impact of it threw me to that wall that's standing. That would be the west wall, is what you kind of see there on the side that's intact. And that's the west wall. And so I was thrown face first into that west wall, and it fractured my skull, and it left me unconscious for probably 20, 30 minutes. And in fact, I think the Marines there probably thought I was dead, and they were looking to see if there were other people to recover there in the rubble. And because, I mean, it was just a jumble. That first picture you showed, it's kind of after it's all cleaned out, right? But right when it happened, there was just furniture everywhere and tables and chairs and cabinets all on top of each other. And it was just a mess. And so Sergeant Snydercourt lived through it, and Gunny Bustle lived through it, and Captain Cooper lived through it, and Sergeant Hoxing lived through it. And so they were looking for survivors. And so after a time, I recovered, right? And I stood up, and Sergeant Snydercourt looked at me and he goes, "Captain Norfleet, you look really bad," right? Because I had a piece of glass sticking out of my right eye, and I had just shrapnel through my head, and I was just bleeding profusely everywhere. And then one of the other things that happened is here on my ulnar artery on my wrist, it severed my major artery here in my left arm. And so by the time I woke up and saw Sergeant Snydercourt says, "Randy, you need to Captain Norfleet, you need to get here on this desk, and we're going to help administer first aid and stop the bleeding," right? And so I got there on that desk, and anyhow, I could just tell, it was like, to me, the Lord was just speaking to me at that time, right? And that I was in shock. I had a piece of glass sticking out of my right eye, and I could feel myself bleeding out. And so I felt like if I didn't get off of that table, that I was going to bleed out and die right there on that table. And
Yeah.
so I got up off of that table, and what had happened is that the dust from the bomb had all settled, right? And there was kind of this eerie quiet, like you couldn't hear the birds chirping, you didn't hear any traffic. All I could hear was the roaring of the fire, because right across from the building there's a parking lot, and all those cars had been burst into flames from the explosion. And so all I could hear was the roar of those fires going on. But other than that, it was just eerily quiet. And so anyhow, as I got up off of the table, what I noticed is somebody had gone out the back door, right, gone to the back of the building, and they had been bleeding, and they had bled these bright red blood drops. They're still red. When oxygen's fresh, I mean, when
Yeah.
blood's fresh, it's got all that oxygen in it. And so all I could see was that blood trail, right? Because I had a piece of glass in my eye. I was in shock, from the blood loss and from the blunt trauma. And so I just followed that blood trail to the back of the building. And anyhow, as I got back to the back of the building, that's where the emergency fire stairs were. And of all things, the stairs were intact. And so I walked down 6 flights out the back of the building. And
Mm-hmm.
just as I came out the back of the building, there was an Oklahoma Highway Patrol officer there, a lieutenant, and he directed me because the ambulance had already come, right? And so there was an ambulance on the side of the building, and I went in and I sat there, and there was an Army recruiter that was in there with a broken leg, and anyhow, just as I got into the ambulance took off, and they took us to St. Michael's Hospital, right? And
And, and
so,
and for the folks
yeah,
out there, the
sure.
hospital was only 10 minutes away.
Yeah, it was
So as
literally
soon as
two
they had
blocks.
yeah, 2 blocks. So as soon as they had the explosion went off, everybody started sending
Hmm.
EMT help.
Yep, yep.
Well, you know what? Yeah, go ahead.
In fact, a lot of the doctors and nurses walked to the bombing site and were helping people there on the street.
Man, all right. I got to take you back because I helped you write your piece years ago. I'm
Hmm.
very, very moved by this whole story. Your chance encounter, we need to go back. You kind of glanced over it. When you were sitting at the desk calling for Sergeant Davis,
Sure,
that's when Randy Guzman came in to say
that's
hi to
correct.
you.
Hmm.
And the phone rang, and it was for him, right?
Well,
Because
it
he
was a
sat down
busy,
to take the
yeah.
phone. No, but
Yes,
he,
that's
he
right.
sat down to take the phone call,
Yep,
and you stepped around, and that's when you went over to the supply guys
that's right.
when the bomb blew up, and then Randy disappears. What what I'm trying to relay is just uh, we talk about fate is the hunter, and it just your time was not that time to go, Randy.
That's right.
And Godspeed to Randy Guzman. I've got a picture of him and Sergeant Davis right here. Um, Randy, unfortunately, as soon as the bomb exploded, the that part of the building collapsed and took him and Sergeant Davis with him. And you were just mere feet away, which to me, talk about right there in the jaws of death. It you you never really talk about that. What was it like
Yeah.
the explosion? Do you remember the feeling? Um, did your auditory senses just kind of shut down, or what do you
Yeah,
remember
no.
about the initial?
That's the funny thing about the blast, right? Is that when you have a big blast like that, it either blows out your eardrums or it doesn't, right? And so fortunately it didn't hurt me too bad that way. But like I said, it was just for me it was like a whooshing sound, right? Is that I felt the the compressed air going by me, but I didn't actually hear the bomb itself. But uh,
That's
I think
amazing.
to your point about you know fate being the hunter, right? That a lot of us live our lives, and we just get into a comfortable routine, and when something like this happens in our lives, it really causes us to step back and contemplate what's important in our lives, and to reprioritize our lives, and to really regain um, what I would, maybe it's a trite term, but carpe diem, right? Is that you've got to as you go through something like this, you've got to recapture that zest for life. And so because destiny and fate chose me to be here with you guys today, I've tried to live every day since that bombing, in a carpe diem type way, because for me, I'm living on extra time, right?
Right.
And so for me, as I look for the silver lining in these black clouds that happen so frequently in our lives, that's one of the things that I've taken from the experience, is that, I need to cherish and maximize every day that the Lord has given me.
Yeah. Now, we'll go forward real quick. You get to the hospital. How many times did you die on the table?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not sure how many times I died on the table, but um, so anyhow, as they got me out of the ambulance, and they got a wheelchair for me, they wheeled me into surgery, and I went straight into surgery. And so you gotta understand, at this time I'm 29 years old. I'm a young man, just like you, Mitch. I'm a pilot, and aggressive, and just full of life, right? And so anyhow, as I get there, I have this nurse, and she's just a beautiful blonde nurse, right? And so the first thing I do is I tell her my wife's phone number, and so she writes my wife's phone number on her arm, right?
Yeah.
And so, so I know that she's going to call my wife as soon as she's able. And so anyhow, I'm kind of laying there on the gurney, and I'm looking up at this beautiful buxom lady, and
And you
she's
say,
holding.
can I get a sponge bath?
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm holding her hand,
Yeah.
and her hand was so warm, right? Because I was to find out later that when I was laying down on that gurney, my blood pressure was actually 50 over zero.
Oof. Yeah. How much blood had you lost at this point? Do you know? Oh no! Don't tell me we lost Randy.
Hey, Mitch, are you there?
Yeah, we lost you there
Hey,
for a second. Yeah, we lost you
sorry about
50
that.
over zero, and it was
Yeah,
dramatic. It was like,
it was
well,
a
how?
dramatic moment, right? So it's 50 over zero, right? And literally I'm bleeding out right there on the gurney, right? And and so what they did, is I'm sitting there. I'm actually in my dress, my blue deltas, right? The
Right.
Marine Corps recruiting uniform is what I was in. And so they start cutting off my uniform, and I've got this hot buxom blonde holding my hand, and she feels so warm, and I'm like, man, if they cut off all my clothes, they're going to see my appreciation for this. And, and needless to say, I didn't have enough blood to show much appreciation. And so anyhow, I go into surgery, and and then I'm in surgery from then until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And
Jeez.
yeah, so that's kind of that part of the story. And this kind of is where I switch over and tell a little bit of my wife's side of the story.
Yeah.
Um, so if you like, I'll tell that part of the story. So my wife was 27 at the time, and we had a 4-year-old son, Matthew. We had a 16-month-old son, Paul, and my wife was 7 months pregnant with our daughter, Morgan. Okay. And so what happened to her is she had just dropped her 4-year-old son off at the church daycare center, and she had come home, and she was feeding our 16-month-old son, Paul, and she gets a call from one of her church lady friends, right? And the church lady's friend says, hey, um, you should see they just bombed the Oklahoma City building, and you need to turn the TV on and look at it and see what was going on. And this was, in 95, they're just starting to put TV cameras on helicopters. And so since it was 9 o'clock in the morning, they had all these traffic helicopters up, right? So
Yeah.
this big explosion happens, and all these traffic copters go over to see what's going on. And so literally within minutes of the bomb, they had camera TVs right there on the building, right? And so,
Overlooking, looking down
yeah,
into the
these
hole,
helicopters
into the pit.
looking into the hole and all of what's going on. And so my wife, she turns on the TV, and the first thing that she sees is my black Ford Ranger truck is all crumpled up, right? Because I parked right in front of the bomb. And so she drops the phone, because she's like, oh my husband is dead, because I can see his truck right there.
How
And
did your truck? How did your truck survive being right in front of the blast?
oh yeah, that is a story all in itself, right? Well, so McVeigh, really was not that smart of a explosive expert. And so when the explosion went forward through the front of the truck, the blast was actually directed out by the engine block, right?
Uh
And
huh.
and so that kept my car from just being completely demolished. I mean, it was still
Oh,
total, but it wasn't completely demolished. It wasn't it because of that, right? And then the other thing that that I've heard them say is that if McVeigh had to put um, a metal sheet metal, or a thing of
barrier.
metal and a barrier on the backside of it, and had directed the bomb towards the
Yeah.
building, that they would have just it would have leveled the whole building,
Yeah.
right?
What do they call
And
those
so
shape IEDs?
yeah, a shape charge.
Oh, it was shape charge. What they
Yeah,
were doing with the IEDs over penetrators? They were
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's how a Sabot round works, right? Is it's got a when it hits the tank, then it shapes the charge and it creates a hole, right? And so you didn't have to have a real big shape to the charge. You just needed to kind of direct the energy in the general direction of the building. And
Yeah.
5,000 pounds of fertilizer would have leveled the whole building, to my understanding. And
Jeez.
so anyhow, um, that's so she sees my truck, and she drops the phone, and then she just obviously she's beside herself, right? Because she's got two small children, she's pregnant with a third, and she's 7 months pregnant, so she's big pregnant at this time, right?
Yeah.
And um so anyhow, she picks up the phone, and she tells her prayer partner there on the other end. She says, hey, I think my husband was in the bombing. I think he's dead. Right. So obviously all the ladies in the church, they come to our house, and they're there supporting, and there's kind of a watch to that starts to find out what my situation is. And as it turned out, in my truck, I had one of those first cell phones that you could, you know, um, that you can install in your phone in your truck, and it had a
Yeah.
was on a stand. And so I
Yeah.
actually had a cell phone in the truck. And so my wife started calling that cell phone. It just ring and ring and ring, and
Yeah.
obviously it was not connected, right? And so anyhow, in the course of that morning, because I was officer selection officer, I had a couple lieutenants that I commissioned, and they were in the Marine Corps. They're waiting to go to the basic school. And so my lead lieutenant, my lead second lieutenant, was Rick Moore, and or I'm sorry, Nick Moore, and Nick Morris. There, see, I'm getting old. Nick Morris, and he later became a lieutenant colonel of a CH-53 squadron, I believe. And anyhow, so Nick Morris, the second lieutenant Nick Morris, came to the house in uniform, right? And
Oh.
so since he was since he was a new second lieutenant, he had no idea what that meant, right? And so when he walked up to the door, and we had been around the Marine Corps for a while, my wife thought it was a notification officer that the Marine Corps was coming to tell her that
Your
that I
husband had
was,
died. Right.
yeah, that he was not, he was there. So as he come to the door, my wife was like, no, you're not coming in this house, because my husband is not dead, and you can stay outside, right? Well, finally,
Poor guy.
Lieutenant Morris, he he convinced my wife that he didn't know anything and that he was just there to help. And so she let him in the house, right? And so anyhow, so we have this watch, right? And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like I was telling you that story, the nurse that had my phone number on there, she gets out of surgery with me. And so she calls my wife and she says, Mrs. Norfleet, we've got your husband. He's intensive care. We're not sure he's going to make it through the night. You need to come and see your husband and say goodbye to him now. Right. And so we had a family member that was there in Stillwater, and she drove my wife down to the building. And as she got to the building, if y'all remember or what had happened is, it had started to rain later in the afternoon, so it was kind of wet and kind of warm, and you had all of the victims there that were dead, and so the smell of that building was just overwhelming. So she went by the building to get to the hospital because they were just 2 blocks apart from each other. The magnitude of the disaster, coupled with the smell of all the dead bodies, was just was too much for her. And so she went into labor, right? Just because of the stress of the whole thing, as you can imagine. So she gets up there to St. Anthony's Hospital, and you can imagine there at the emergency room entrance, there's
Chaos.
hundreds. Yeah, it's chaos, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people there. And they have signs and pictures. Have you seen my brother? Have you seen my mother? Have you seen my child? And everybody is looking for their loved ones there. And so it was really a bittersweet moment for my wife, because she's like, well, I'm glad I know that my husband's alive and he's in the hospital, but he's seriously injured. So it was really a very traumatic time for her. So as she gets through there to the front door of the emergency room, she says, I'm Mrs. Captain Norfleet, and my husband is here in the hospital. And she starts talking to the nurse there, and they bring her inside of the security, because they had kind of locked down the hospital at that point, right? And so she's sitting there, or standing there, talking to the hospital, kind of, folding over with her contractions, and my wife is like, "Yeah, I'm here to see my husband." And the nurse looks at my wife and she goes, "Honey, you're going to have a baby, and we're going to take you over to the labor and delivery ward." And so fortunately they got her there. I guess they gave her Pitocin or something to that effect, and they were able to stop the contractions. That's right. So they stopped the contractions, and my daughter was born 2 months later at full term. And so anyhow, so after that, they let her into my ICU room, and there I am. I'm knocked out. I'm still under my anesthesia, and the night passes, and then the next morning, they're gonna wake me up from my surgery, right? And so in my room, you've got to imagine, the chaos and all of the, kind of heightened excitement and everything that was going on at that time. Because in '95, the Oklahoma City bombing was the biggest terrorist attack that had ever happened in the United States, and more people were killed it was just one of the biggest attacks that had ever happened
Right, we
there
lost
on the.
168 people and 19
That's right.
children. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. And so it was a huge loss of life. It was such a big deal. And so as in my hospital room, I had the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Carl Mundy, was in there with me. I had the 6th Marine Corps District CO was there. I had my own CO that was there. And, in addition to that, I had Time and Newsweek magazine journalists were in there. And at the time, I think both of those are now bankrupt or no longer in print. But anyhow, at the time, they were the largest national magazines, news magazines, and they were in my room. And then, of course, I had my wife and I had my family, and everybody was in the room because they wanted Randy. They wanted to be there when I come out of my anesthesia. And so my wife, she comes up to the side of the bed, and she's just stroking my hand, and she goes, "Randy, because my wife is very soft spoken, and she goes, "Randy, can you hear me?" And so I'm coming out of this um, haze of the anesthesia, and I still don't have all of my senses to me, but I can hear my wife's voice, and I'm starting to wake up. And the first thing that comes out of my mouth is, "Honey, do I still have my junk?" Right? and and so
What a guy! What a guy!
what I didn't know is that on the other side of my bed was the commandant of the Marine Corps, and the commandant is like, "That's my boy," right? First things first, you got to make sure your gun is clean and ready for operation, right? And so, um,
Wow.
anyhow, everybody got a big laugh at my expense on that, but that was a lot of fun. And I mean, it wasn't fun, but it was a light moment there in the room. And
That's
so,
actually, yeah.
yeah, so
Every guy, well, yeah, every movie you see, like a war film, the guy gets shot, and he's like, "Check my junk, man. Check my junk.
yeah,
I still got my rifle. Check my junk."
that's right,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Prior
Well, I'll tell you
that,
what. We'll stop right there on
sure.
that note,
Mhm.
and I want to go over to Doug, who has probably only told this half dozen times to folks, and this is something that bringing the two of you together is actually kind of cool. So, you know what, Doug, take it away. That morning you're in class. Let's go back to 1995.
Okay. A little backstory. I kind of puts it in perspective. My dad was an Army officer, so I grew up overseas. And my senior year of high school was the year that Noriega, with the United States, invaded Panama, and they turned our high school into a refugee camp. So I kind of, growing up as a military brat, had been experienced to disaster events and the chaos that goes in that. So anyway, I joined the Marines. I was an infantry Marine and joined in Austin and reserves, but then I went to college in Oklahoma. So I transferred and was assigned to the Fox Battery 214 in Oklahoma City. And I was taking college classes at East Central University in Ada, Oklahoma. And at 9 o'clock on that day, I was in a ROTC class for taking a military leadership class with some other friends of mine that were also in our unit, and some other former veterans. I was in the class actually with Sergeant Jeff Hargraves. He was in my unit. And about the time, about 9 o'clock, we'd already gotten to class. We're all just jaw jacking and talking before class starts. And there was a TV outside the classroom, because we were in the ROTC wing of the campus. And somebody said, "Hey, man, there's a huge explosion a little after 9 o'clock, a huge explosion in Oklahoma City. They think it was a gas explosion." And so we all kind of left class, walked out into that area that had the television. We were watching the footage that Randy was talking about, just smoke everywhere. My buddy Jeff, he says, "Man, I've got a friend that's there at that recruiting station." And so he left into another room, started trying to call him, and made several calls. He said couldn't get back in touch with him. And he came back and said, "Man, I can't get hold of my buddy." And I looked at him. I said, "Well, let's go." I did it before when I was in Panama. I was a kid. So, hey, I'm a Marine. Let's go. That's our area. They may need us later. So let's go. So we agreed that we were going to go home, grab our camis, grab our Kevlars and flak jackets and our gear, and just jump in my truck. So we jumped in my Jeep and we hauled butt to Oklahoma City. Normally it's a trip from Oklahoma City to ate us about an hour and a half. I think we made about 45 minutes. We were flying. There was no,
Jeez.
the police
Yeah, no
weren't there.
police on the road.
Yeah,
right?
they were out. They were doing something else. So we roll up, and I'd never been downtown Oklahoma City, so I didn't know where to go. But we could see the smoke plumes coming from Oklahoma City, and we saw some Oklahoma City police blocking the exit ramps that led to downtown. And so I was like, hey, write on the piece of paper, put on their Marine Rescue Team in case they asked. But by the time we pulled up to there, he didn't want to see our sign. We just said, hey, we're with the Marines. We're here to help. And the guy just let us go right through. So we worked our way downtown, just following the plumes and then the debris. And we pulled over and parked and started making our way toward what we felt was the ground zero. About a block away or so from the Murrah Building, bumped into a female federal agent. I think she was ATF or DEA, I can't remember, but she had said, hey, you guys just getting here? I said, yes, ma'am, we're with the Marines. We're just here to help. She says, okay, come on. And as we're walking, we're following her. There was just chunks. Well, one thing I saw was a huge axle that was laying on top of a vehicle that obviously been flown. Some type of vehicle exploded, and this giant axle just had crushed this vehicle that was as we're walking in. And I also noticed on the ground tons of shards of metal, this aluminum metal. I didn't know what it was. I just, as a Marine, we pick up souvenirs, and I'm like, hey, that's interesting. So I picked them up, put them on my flak jacket, and just kept on going. She goes, and she turns around as we're getting closer to the building. We can see where the impact area was. We can see the collapsed part of the building. It was just incredible. It was one of those things that you just couldn't imagine seeing as you come around the corner, and you smell the smoke and you smell the dust, but when you see the building and just seeing the massive size of this building that looked at the time like a giant had taken a bite out of a sandwich, it was absolutely incredible. She says, have you seen the crater yet? I'm like, no. And so we walk over there, and she takes us up to the crater, and it was an immense crater. Deep water was coming out of the water mains. It was incredible. I can only, describe it as more like a battle scene, or just combat. Some huge bomb exploded or something, but still the narrative was it was a gas explosion. But then we was like, just in awe, talking to this federal agent. She says, and as she's looking around, she says, somebody here in a little bit is going to realize that this is a crime scene and that we need to secure this area and we need to get all these people out of here. I'm like, you think it's a crime scene? So I don't know. She's like, yeah, it is. It's got to be an explosion. I'm like, okay. So
are there lots of people gawking, standing there taking pictures? What?
Some of them were, because there were the surrounding buildings. People had evacuated out of that, but there were some people that kind of worked their way back toward, just to kind of look from a distance. And there were a lot of people who just kind of self-deployed themselves over to try to see what they could help. But by the time we got there, it was probably 10:30, somewhere like that. It just before 11. So, the initial smoke and stuff had started to dissipate. The fire trucks had approached. They had already had a makeshift command center. They had us check in there. We checked in with them, and they said, oh, where do you want us? And they said, well, the fire department said, we want you to go into the basement. So they direct us to the basement parking garage. I say basement, but it's the parking garage on the back side of the building, or kind of the side. And they put us down there because they had began to stage the remains of people they were able to pull out, because by the time we had gotten there, they were still doing recovery, looking for survivors, but mostly what they were pulling out were bodies and what remains. And so they had put us in charge just to make sure that we kept anybody out. Reporters started showing up and wanting to get close to the building and get into the building and trying to get pictures of the line of bodies we had in body bags. And so they'd actually,
That's horrible.
Yeah, it was something else. So we pushed everybody back out of there. And they had told us that they had run out of body bags. So therefore, some of the people that they were staging in the basement, they were lining them up, and some of them just covered with blankets and things as such. And so shortly thereafter that, I don't remember what time, it's kind of really, like I said, I haven't really talked about much since it happened, but there was a short time after that, there was there were people yelling and screaming that they found another bomb, and they yelled and they get on PAs, evacuate. And so all of a sudden you see people just taking off running away from the Murrah Building. And so me and Sergeant Sargraves just look at each other and like, what do we do? It's like, I don't know, man. Maybe the building's going to collapse. We don't know because we just weren't sure where what happened. So we just kind of take off. We go about a block away and we stop, and somebody gave it all clear. I think a policeman said, "Oh, that wasn't a bomb. It was it's an AT-4 dummy that the ATF had in their building." So some of us start trickling back to the building, and about that time, it wasn't long after that they gave another, evacuate. But that time, most people didn't leave. We just said, no, we're not going to. It doesn't look good for Marines to run away from stuff, so we're not going to do that again. So we just stayed at our post, and anyway, by the time they were still bringing in. This is probably midday, 1 o'clock, a little after lunch. They started bringing in, the community was just so gracious. They started bringing in supplies. We had truckloads of supplies being brought in from Home Depot and Lowe's that were dropping off gloves and goggles and shovels and any kind of equipment, flashlights. We had the restaurants in the area were bringing so much food. They started staging all that stuff in our area. So we had stacks, 6 foot tall pizza boxes that people could come by and get drinks or dropping off cases. We had people coming by and go, "Hey, you guys, who are you guys with?" I said, "We're with the Marines." So they go, "Hey, you have a cell phone?" We're like, "What's a cell phone?" I did have a cell phone, but well, here you go. They threw us a bag phone, and I just looked at my sergeant. I said, "What do we do with this?" He said, "I don't know. Just hang on to it." So we hung on to it, and then this is probably a little after lunch, 2 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A fire captain came up and said, "Hey, nobody searched the building. Nobody searched the basement yet. I need you to come with me." And I was like, "All right," because I'm a little bigger than Sergeant Hargraves. His nickname in our unit was Short Round because he's about 5'2", but he was mean as a tank. So, he looked at me and looked at him and goes, "Well, I bet you can knock down some doors." I was like, "Yes, sir, I can do that." So we went and crawled into the building, made our way through.
All right, so the basement.
Yes, sir.
Now, by that time, they've already probably moved the bodies out.
They were still, yes, sir. They still staged them there. They were trying to, because by that time there was a church across the street. I think it was a Methodist church. They were getting kind of backlogged or full, so they were just kind of staging them there because they were waiting to get more blankets and more things to cover people because they didn't want them to leave the building from the parking garage and go across the street exposed to anybody taking pictures. So that's kind of why they wanted to keep them there. So we tried to do what we could to keep them covered.
Did you all carry remains across?
Yes, sir. That was one of the first things when the captain came to get me. We went over that direction and we were going to go into the building, but they asked for help to carry help carry gurneys across, and we were doing that. I have to have somebody who's, they were in a blanket, had a blanket covering them, so we had to kind of keep their parts from falling off the blanket. It was just surreal just to see, one that this had actually happened, and then to actually see the human impact of people who had been just shattered by the bomb, and then it started making me angry, thinking the fact that there was media trying to take pictures of this thing and trying to exploit this tragedy and these people's family members and stuff. But we took them across. We came back. They said, "All right, we'll just stage them here." And the captain said, "Hey, come with me." And we went, climbed underneath the basement where the parking garage was. There was a little ladder well or some stairs that lead up. But as you go up the first landing of the stairs, there was a big hole that had been knocked through that led into the into the inner part of the buildings, like toward the front of the building. But the building had collapsed and they had pancaked themselves down. So we kind of had to work our way through the hole and then up probably an 8-foot debris pile until we get on top of that. When we got on top of that, it kind of leveled off a little bit, kind of an angle. And it was just surreal because we get up and I pop up there, and there's furniture and there's debris and everything. And then there's just piles of money everywhere. 20s, 50s, 100s, dollar bills, $5s, just scattered. And I looked up and it was just, I could see the very top of the building, and I could see the sky and just debris that was dangling from the top. But it was probably, 6 or 8 feet or 6 or 8 stories up that I could almost look. I wasn't sure what it was, but it was pretty high.
Really? I was going to ask if it was dark in there, but you're exposed.
Yeah, it was completely exposed because by the time where we were at, to the left of me was the kind of the opening area. There's still some of the, I guess, the west wall, which was still pretty secured.
How about
Yeah,
that
yeah,
right
right there.
there?
It's, yeah,
Like
pretty
looking at
secured.
that
Hmm.
photo. Okay. So
Yeah, so
where
we
are you?
kind of, yeah, so I'm looking at the camera, or I'm looking at the picture. So my right is where that solid pillar is.
Yeah.
On that side was the parking garage underneath. We came up through a hole. So back in that debris field, back when I was there, looks like it's been cleaned up quite a bit, but there were more layers of pancaked wall that come down. So we were kind of, I can't really point to it. I can point to it, but you
Yeah.
can't see one pointing. But yeah, you could almost look up and see there. But yeah, this picture must have been taken after the cleanup because there were still pancaked floors dangling
Right.
down that first day. So anyway, we look up and it's just surreal. And I look ahead of me, probably 15 yards or so. There's a man dressed in a suit, just laying face down. Looked, compared to the other people I'd seen in the basement, this man was intact. Didn't look like he sustained any injury. So went up to him, said, "Sir, are you okay?" And when I touched him, I could tell he'd already passed. He had rigor mortis, or sit in, roll him over, and he had severe trauma to his face. So we called for a stretcher. We pulled him up and took him back down through the hole and staged to back up. And then we went back up the same way, worked our way around, ended up going through the area where this nurse had gotten killed when they were doing the amputation on somebody who'd gotten their leg stuck, I think it was. Worked our way around there because we were trying to work our way down to the lower areas to check the basements. And so we end up going to one basement exit and kicking down some bathroom doors, checking if there's anybody stuck in bathrooms. Then we worked our way down to a lower level of the parking garage. I say basement, but it's the parking garage. So there was a lower level of parking garage. We went down there and it had been flooded about up to thigh high.
Did you all find anybody down there?
No, the captain and I we waded through there and searched through. We had some lights and we were able to search through. It was very dark in that area. Water was still being flowed in. And so we searched around where we could inside cars and see if we saw anybody through that area. But it was a smaller, limited space. And so he said, "Hey, it looks good. We don't want to get stuck down here." He said the building's still kind of not stable. So it seemed
did
like,
you ever hear it? Was it creaking or, I mean, what was it like down in there? Did you hear the building groan, creak?
No, not that I recall. I mean, I just know that we were moving around so much. We were going down and kicking in doors and just kind of looking in places that the nooks and crannies, just see if there's anybody that might have been overlooked. There was just so much noise from, sirens that were going on and people that were talking.
Oop, Doug.
Yeah, everybody's getting their turn with little internet interruption.
Oh man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I tell you what. I have to pull him out. I think we lost Doug for a second. So Randy, to pick up where he's going, how long?
Yeah, so let me kind of pick up
Yeah.
on his story, right? So, just a TikTok on this thing, right? The bomb happened at 9:02 a.m. and you heard my story, and probably I had recovered and was getting out of the building about 9:30, and then as you heard this story is that he was there probably about an hour after that, right? And so so all of this is happening all at the same time, and I'm sure he'll be back on here in just a second, but let me make one of the connections, right? Is that he was talking about his friend that he had been talking to and trying to call and connect to. And as we found out later, is that was actually Sergeant Benjamin Davis, and that had lost his life there.
That Jeff was friends with, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, it's just very interesting. It's kind of like, you've heard those stories of 6 degrees of separation, how we're all closely interrelated and interconnected with each other. And when you had a bombing like this happen, in such a tight community like Oklahoma is, really it's a small state, and it's a real tight community, and it's just amazing of all the different connections that a big bomb and a big explosion like this um, can affect people. And so, like even yourself, Mitch, when we're all C-130 pilots, and in just to make some connections, when we were in Desert Storm, there's a C-130 pilot that I flew with, and his name was Michael Horrocks, and he was, I believe he was with 352, I believe, and anyhow,
No,
he was about the same.
Mike was 252.
Was he 252?
Yeah,
I
Mike
thought
was
he
252.
was a
Yes.
California Marine, but anyhow, Michael Horrocks was there, and and I flew with him in Desert Storm, and so anyhow, kind of as life goes along, he got out of the Marine Corps and he went to American Airlines, much like you did, Taco.
United.
And he was with United.
Yeah, because he was United 175, went into the South Tower.
Okay, well, see, then you know the story better than I do. And anyhow, so Michael Horrocks, a fellow C-130 pilot, he was the first officer there on the first plane to go into the towers there. And so there's a lot of connectedness between what happened in Oklahoma City and what happened at 9/11, just 6 years later. And
Well, you had
yeah.
you had that police. Who was the or a fireman that had done a lot of the rescue at Oklahoma City that also perished
Yeah,
up
First
in.
Sergeant Brian Faustain, I believe was his name. Anyhow, he was a Marine Reservist. He's a first sergeant, and he was on the New York City Fire Department. And so, as they started to kind of come to grips with the tragedy that happened in Oklahoma City, they called for specialist teams that were, specialists in recovery. And so, because they were, there are a lot of Marines in that group, and they had a specialty in recovery, from explosions and things like that. Then they had flown down from New York City to Oklahoma City. And so later, and we had kind of talked about some of this, is that, Sergeant Davis and Captain Guzman were found there in the building. And my understanding is that Captain Guzman was, when they found him, and this first sergeant found him, is that he was still hanging on to the phone that I had been holding on to, not but 10 seconds before, right? And hung up, and he had come and picked it up. And so anyhow, the Marines there, on that day, when they found the Marines, they identified both Captain Guzman and Sergeant Davis by the blood stripes on their uniforms, right? Because the Marines have the blood stripe there on their dress blue uniforms, pants, and that's called a blood stripe, right? And so that's how they identified Sergeant Davis and Captain Guzman. So anyhow, when they found their bodies and they were ready to bring them out of the remains, they stopped all of the construction equipment, and then the Marines formed up a detachment there and gave them their honors there, that we give any fallen Marine, and then they took them out and gently put them into into to take them away. And so anyhow, the rest of the story is that 6 years later, that same first sergeant, um, he was a New York fireman, right? And so 6 years later, he was killed in the 9/11, because he's one of those firemen that was, running up the stairs to save people, right?
Right.
And I think that's part of the story here, is that, Marines, are always the first to go towards the danger, right? And so when you have men and women, like that are willing to rush towards the danger, that brings them into the nexus of so many things that happen in life, right? And these major events that happen in life. And that's why the Marine Corps is just as important to the country internally as it is externally in fighting our country's battles, right? Is that, we've had this story here about how the Marines were willing to rush in and help and put themselves in harm's way to make sure that their fellow countrymen are safe and protected. And to me, that's just a great example of what all of us should be, is to have that love of country and that love of brother, that we're willing to go that extra mile to to ensure that we're all safe together. And I think that's what you're hearing in this story.
Yeah, it's great. Great, actual, awesome points. I can make some quotes out of that. Hey,
Absolutely.
Doug, we lost you. We lost you there for a minute.
That's all right.
What
Yeah, I
happened?
don't know. Same. Yeah. I don't remember where I was at, but it's
Going
uh,
upstairs. You
yeah.
eventually later went up to reclaim the colors.
Yeah, so we had come back. I think we'd taken a break because it was pretty exhausting, kind of working our way through there. So later, we came back. We took a break. We had already mentioned several times to the fire department, hey, we'd like to go up and see if we can help find, because we were there because of my friend's buddy, Sergeant Hargraves' friend, who I didn't realize until I guess last night when we spoke that it was Sergeant Davis who was getting his packet to go to OCS. And so it was just a coincidence. I had no idea who he was until last night. And so anyway, they finally came back to us and said, hey, it's okay. You can come with us. We wanted to see if you guys want to come recover your colors. And we said, absolutely. So we went up this back ladder up there. The ladder stairs that we had gone up, partially, some of it was more damaged on one side. It wasn't really an intact stairwell that we had gone up to. So when we got up to the room, it was just surreal. Kind of there was a lot of debris covering the hallway as we went in there. Entered into the main room that was, I guess, the initial room where you were at with making the phone call, and it looked, it's like somebody had taken a big bite of that room, and there was furniture and debris there. And I noticed it was just weird because I believe it was to the left of me, might be vice versa, but to the left of me, it was nothing but carnage and, disaster. And then almost to the right, you still see a desk, and things that were almost intact, it hadn't gotten blown out of the building. And then the Marine colors were kind of still posted there, kind of knocked over to the side, but they were still there. And so Sergeant Hargraves and myself, we went and grabbed our colors, the Marine Corps flag. They were on a post on the standard, on the staff rod. We just rolled them up and took them downstairs with us. We looked around the place, but they kept telling us, hey, you don't want to be here. It's not stable. We don't know what's going on with this place. We're like, okay. So we rolled up the flags and we covered it, took it downstairs. We went back to our basement. There was a staff sergeant who was part of our unit and had showed up, wanted to see what he could do to help. And we're like, hey, can you take these colors and post them up or take care of them? He said, absolutely. He parked close by. So anyway, those colors end up being displayed in our reserve unit at 214. But then we went back, Sergeant Hargraves and ourselves went back. While we were resting, I was sitting there, and this time about some rescue dogs started showing up. These folks had flown in from out of state, and this guy showed up with his dog, had a little yellow vest on and little boots on his feet. And I go, hey, that's cool. What's this? Why is he wearing boots? He said, oh, it's because of the debris. It's hard on their feet. First time I was a young kid. I didn't know much about, rescue dogs and all that stuff. So he explained to me what they do and how they work and all that stuff. And I was like, man, that's so great. And it was just neat to see within the few hours, how many people were not just coming from around our area, but from out of state as well. And start showing up. So I think, again, about that time, the captain came back and said, hey, let's go check this other area. So we went into another part of the building in the lower level. We were down there for probably a couple hours, it seemed like, because we were pulling things out and he wanted to move some debris out of the way, and we were doing some of that stuff. It didn't seem like it was very long, but by the time we got back to where we had come, where we initially staged in the basement of the parking garage, It had already began to rain. It was raining, and they'd already put up fences. They put a chain link fence all the way around the building. And before I'd gone down, I hadn't seen it. I may have begun to sprinkle before, but I don't remember. But anyway, it was sprinkling. It got dark. They started bringing trucks out. And then they started making announcements. Hey, if you're not part of a first responder unit, if you're not a firefighter, EMT, you need to go, because they made that call after that nurse had, died after hitting her head in there. So we stuck around a little bit longer, but initially.
But you had your Kevlar.
Oh yeah. We had a Kevlar. We had a flat vest on her, but we stuck around for a little bit while longer, maybe an hour or two, but there really wasn't anything for us to do. We kept asking, what else can we do? But by that time they were starting to bring in machinery and some other things like that. I think that they kind of made that decision. We're now in recovery mode instead of rescue mode. So it was about midnight, 11:30 that night, midnight or so, that we decided, hey, let's go ahead and go home, because we were getting pretty tired too, emotionally and physically, and
Oh yeah. Did you ever have any ill effects from breathing all the dust and all the stuff like the guys up there in New York?
No, it was a lot of concrete dust smell, or dust in the air. Not that I'm aware of had any effects to it. I do remember. So that was April 19th. My son was born May 10th, and I remember when he was at the hospital, I decided I was going to walk up the stairs to go to the maternity ward to go, check on him and stuff. And I remember walking up the stairs with a friend of mine, and as I'm walking up the stairs, that kind of noise of the echo inside those ladder wells and the dust smell, that concrete dust, just kind of, it hit me, and all of a sudden I just froze up, started tearing up. I'm like, what is wrong with you, man? You're a devil dog. Let's go, But it threw me back, and I had no idea what was wrong. And a
little natural PTSD from that
Yeah.
event.
Yeah, I mean, I had some dreams, but after that, some experiences. But then later on, I had gotten law enforcement later that year, and and started talking to other guys who I shared. They were sharing stories of some trauma they had gone through, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's what I experienced too. It wasn't disability, no disability as far as not able to work or anything, but it just was something that I just wasn't quite aware of the fact that I had that. How that really could affect a human being. So it made me more sympathetic later on in my career in law enforcement as a pastor and helping other people with PTSD. I'm like, I know a little bit about it, and from my little experience, and realizing, hey, it's okay to ask for help and to lean on each other. And the more you share your story, it's healing for yourself as well as for you. So I really enjoyed hearing Randy's story, because from the side, it wasn't until last night when we talked and realizing that, hey, we were going after his sergeant who he was trying to help get the OCS. And I thought that was pretty impactful. A small world.
Like, for both of you, this is the first time I've ever heard, I don't think I've ever seen an interview on TV of somebody that was there on the ground side after the post-explosion. And Randy, I'll say I kind of grew up with Randy's story. I returned from Okinawa and went on recruiting duty right north of Randy at 9th Marine Corps District. And that was very impactful. As a matter of fact, Randy, you came to our national convention in Dallas. You remember that? You are a guest speaker.
And I've got a football in the back here from that.
Yeah, you got a football. General Clint signed it for you, or everyone, all of us signed it for you. But to see you and Jamie again was fantastic, and to hear your story and testimony. I mean, I know you and I have talked in the past about woulda, coulda, shoulda. Had I stayed in the squadron, I wouldn't have been on recruiting duty or whatever. But I guarantee you, Randy, that being able to share the gospel and your spiritual side has changed many lives, and you can't put a price on that. That is powerful, and that's what you were meant for. So, whether people believe in destiny or God points in life, I truly do believe in that, and I think that that's what you were destined for. And Doug, you were put in my path, take care of my son and all those kids that you influence. And if you guys don't know, this is one of the finest teachers I've ever encountered. Just outstanding. And he has the admiration and the respect of all the kids at the school, which is very hard these days to get a kid to to like you and
Yeah.
respect you. And Dr. Hanning, I'll tell you, you do a great job, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure. No, the kids, it's a ministry for sure, because trying to pour into these kids' lives and just telling stories and then meeting wonderful people like Randy. And then when you took me last year to the Medal of Honor Association dinner, and I was able to come back and bring those stories to the classroom and say, man, this is incredible. You got to hear this story. I got to meet these wonderful people, and so that's just one of the greatest things I get to do is just to share stories like, Captain Norfleet's and yours and all these others and just pass it along to the kids. So,
Well, it's been eerily quiet on the comment section, and actually, I'll show this right here. Tennyson, great job, Colonel. I remember the story very well. Know some insight from a couple who were there. Yeah, it's funny. My gunners, Abby Babby, was watching, and Randy, he's the one I was telling you. I contacted him years later, and he had thought I died because the whisper trail, of it was a C-130 pilot, a captain had died, he was a flying OSO, Mitch Bell, and so kind of funny how little things like that pre-internet happened. But gentlemen, and folks out there, if you're listening, if you have a question that you want to ask the folks here, feel free to type it in real quick. We'll give you another 5 minutes before we pull it down. So if you have some questions that you want to ask these two fine gentlemen, you got Randy and Doug, feel free to go ahead and plug away and fire off. We've got Stanley up here that says hello, Herzog, Semper Fi, gents. And of course, this is my gunner, Abby Batty. Good evening, Skipper. So if you guys got some questions or whatever, feel free to ask. I'm trying to think of something else that I wanted to ask you. The smell, taste, we kind of talked about that, the explosion. And it's funny, the mind plays tricks. Do you ever find yourself all of a sudden remembering one little thing that you hadn't thought about in years?
Oh, I do. Yes. Because there's so much happening at that one moment and in that time, it just takes a while for your brain to process through it. And so, you'll have an event or a sound or a smell that will just bring that memory right straight back up, and you'll remember it. And so, yeah, I've had that happen to me time and time again as over the years.
How about you, Doug?
So,
yeah, same thing. I think when that impacted me when I was at the hospital, what was weird about our situation was that Sergeant Hargraves and myself, we self-deployed. We didn't go with our unit. We weren't supported by the unit, and we basically went there quietly and left quietly, to do what we could to help. And even when our next drill the next month, the command recognized, the efforts of, the rest to pray for and support those who were lost and the thing, but they never, they mentioned a few of the guys who were firefighters, but Sergeant Hargraves and myself weren't going to step forward and say, hey, by the way, we were there, come look at me. That's not what we were there for. We were there to serve and try to help our fellow Marines and find his buddy and also see what we can do to lend a help to our neighbors. And so, it was kind of strange. And so when we go back, I'm going back to college like a college student and going back to my reserve unit. And then I get hired on as a police officer in Ardmore, and I just go about my life and just didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it because I didn't really want to think about it because it was a horrible situation. The news stories afterwards, and I kind of shut it out. And so even with going to the Oklahoma City Memorial, I didn't go there until about 7 years ago, and it was kind of emotional. And you still see part of the building that was on the side that we were at where the parking garage was at. So it was able to piece some things together. And it's just, it's just tough. It's emotional to just think about that horrific loss, and I forgot to mention too, one of the areas that we entered into the building and our search was through a nursery or a daycare. And so there was children's toys everywhere mixed among glass and stuff. And I was like, the whole time I'm praying, Lord, I don't care what I see or do here, but don't let me see a child that's been hurt. And
had they already gotten all the kids out of there? By then, I guess?
Yeah, surely. Yeah. They had gotten, Yeah, because by the time we got in there, all the initial rescue had taken place, and
Right.
it was just so just like Captain Norfleet had already gone.
Well,
So
Bruce Kalapak has a great question. Randy, did your idea of McVeigh with the camo pants and such have anything to do with him later identifying him in the traffic stop?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Actually, my identification of him didn't help in the traffic stop at all. But what happened after they had captured McVeigh and had him there in that prison, um, the FBI came and interviewed me, and we realized that who I had seen was McVeigh, and so years later, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years later when they had the Oklahoma City uh, the bombing trial there in Denver, Colorado. I was actually the second witness in the trial, and I actually sat across from McVeigh in the courtroom, and so since being the second witness, the first one was one of the mothers that had lost her child, so they wanted to set the right tone and the severity and the trauma that had been inflicted by McVeigh. So that was the first witness. And then for me, as the second witness in the trial, my job was to identify and place McVeigh at the scene, right? And so I just remember as I sat in that trial and I looked just a few feet away to McVeigh, he just had these dark eyes, right? And there was no remorse in his eyes. There was no concern in his eyes. He felt completely vindicated in what he had done. And to me, it was just really very terrifying to see someone that had so much evil, in their eyes. And so anyhow, the trial was a big deal, and we were there. And just to as you get into the trial side of this story, my wife was actually in the courtroom with me, and she sat next to Terry Nichols' mother, who was the accomplice of McVeigh.
Yeah.
And because of all the loss, right, there is so much anger pointed at those two families, the Nichols family and the McVeigh family. And my wife was just sitting there next to Terry Nichols' mother, and she's just your regular grandmother, who had lived a good life and had done nothing wrong. And then all of a sudden, she found herself in this national spotlight, and she was just, to me, the tragedy of the trial was her, an innocent victim that had to bear so much of that anger and hurt that had been caused by her son and by McVeigh. And so, my wife was there with her and was able to comfort her to a certain degree there in the trial. But, it was such a mixture of emotions.
Did McVeigh or Nichols ever show or say anything remorseful about their actions, or
No.
when you were there for his execution, did he say a prayer or anything, or was he just resolute?
Yeah. So I was at Terry Nichols just got life with parole, and I actually was in both of his trials. But for McVeigh at his execution, I think I was there with the U.S. attorney. I believe his name was John Ashcroft. And anyhow, I was there and watched the execution with him. And what happened in the execution is, well, first off, it was lethal death by lethal injection, right?
And
And
where was this
so,
done? Was this in Oklahoma?
well, actually, we were in Oklahoma, and we had a closed feed there at the FAA Center in Oklahoma City, there at the airport. But I believe it happened at the Federal Terre Haute prison,
Oh,
and
okay.
it was done at a federal prison. Anyhow, and it's been a while, so that may not be the right place, but anyhow, that's where I think it was. Anyhow, what happened with McVeigh is, they had already kind of got all of the syringes in him, and all of that. He was already all set up, and then he was on a gurney, and they had put white cloth, white bed sheets over him, and the only thing you could see was just his neck to his head, and all the room was white, and so it was kind of unusual looking, because all you could really identify in the death chamber was McVeigh's neck and his head, and he was just there looking at you, and he had those same dark evil eyes, and he hadn't repented one bit. And so as they wheeled him in, they read the charges against him and the conviction and the death warrant, and then they asked if he had any last words. And John Ashcroft and I sat there, watched the whole thing, and he didn't say a thing. And then the next thing his eyes flutter shut, and about 4 or 5 minutes later, they come back on the speaker and said, McVeigh died at this date and time, and then they closed the curtains on the death chamber, and then it was over. And so really was, took less than 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, at least did it give you a little closure?
Yeah, yeah,
it's a little more pain in it.
Well,
it sounds like it was a little bit too easy for him.
Yeah, I think so. It was certainly a lot easier, especially considering the pain and suffering that he hoisted upon so many families and loved ones from that bombing and devastation. But as far as closure, the way I look at it is that if you were to get a cut in your arm and you had stitches, and you go through all this healing and trying to recover from all of the emotional and physical pain that you've gone through. For me, the execution was kind of like taking the sutures out of closing up the wound, right? It's not that the scar's not there. It's not that the hurt's still not there, but at least the sutures are out of the wound, and you can start moving on with your new normal. And so that's what was important to me. And I just am so sorry for all the victims' families out there that have to wait years and decades for their justice. And to me, it's just a tragedy.
Well, I got a comment from Tony. Tony, go in. No question. Just wanted to say I'm glad Randy is doing well. I remember flying with him a few times in 252. I was fapped out to the station range and got word he was there during the bombing from Neil Drysdale. Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about closure on the execute. I felt better because I remember I joined the Marine Corps in '93, in March of '93. Of course, the drill instructors always want to know where you're from. Of course, I had, they knew I was a proud Texan. And I remember on April 19th, one of the drill instructors said, "Hey, you're from Texas. You're from Texas, right?" "Oh, yes, aye, sir." He goes, "Well, they finally killed that crazy SOB you guys got down there in Waco." "Oh, the cat's out." So I got word from my drill instructor that they had got the Waco event where, that had taken place, which is what kind of instigated Timothy McVeigh to want to do his attack on April 19th, because as payback for the ATF raid with David Koresh. So, I was like, it's a crazy. And then when they finally executed him, I was like, well, finally. I actually got to see David Koresh's grave in Tyler, Texas. I know he promised he was going to resurrect himself, but he was still there when I went by. So
They buried him in Tyler. Why'd they bury him in Tyler?
His mom was from Tyler. Yeah. So for a long time they buried him there, but they didn't mark his grave, I think, till 10 years later. Then they finally put a marker on it. Somebody stole it and they put another one on it. So
jeez.
yeah. It's over at Memorial Cemetery.
On that subject, if folks are interested in this story and how it's shaped the American culture. Is they have a PBS documentary where I tell my story and it's called Oklahoma City, and you know, it starts with the Randy Weaver story in Utah,
Yeah.
and then it draws the connection to David Koresh in Waco, and then it draws the connection from Koresh to Oklahoma City, and so that's a PBS documentary. It's available online if you're interested
And tell them about
in that
your
story.
upcoming deal on National Geographic.
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting. This morning I woke up and read my email, and you know how when you go through your Gmail account, you're like, oh, this is trash, this is trash, this is trash. I almost trashed this email, and I was like, well, you know what? Let me read this one, and it turned out to be an invitation from National Geographic to help them with a 30th anniversary telling of the Oklahoma City bombing story. And so in the next couple of weeks, I'll be working with the National Geographic crews.
That's awesome.
to retell this story, because we need to remember what happened, right?
Yes,
Because, we need to remember Randy Guzman. We need to remember Sergeant Davis. We need to remember all the Marines that have gone before us, right? And they live within sight of us. And so it's incumbent upon us to tell our stories, because the new Marines that are coming on, if we don't tell them, they don't know.
You know what's sad
And
though? You know what is so sad? That was almost 30 years ago. And if you did a man on the street and went out there and asked people, "What's the Oklahoma City bombing? What was 9/11?" They might go down some rabbit hole of conspiracies about this or that. They don't even
Mhm.
know half the time. It is upon us to talk about it, get it out there so that people
Mhm.
understand.
Mhm.
This was the first
Yeah.
large domestic terrorist attack against. And you know what? I'm pissed. You didn't get a Purple Heart out of this, and because
Yeah.
he wasn't affiliated with a ISIS cell or something. But as Doug
Mhm.
brought up, hey, we took an oath against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And you know what? McVeigh was a domestic terrorist.
That's right.
So
That's right.
so you know what? By God, Randy, if I could go to Congress, you know what? Maybe I'll talk to Ronnie Jackson about that, or Keith Self, Judge Self,
Mhm.
Congressman Self. Talk to those two guys about that, because that is something. Now I am going to
Absolutely.
actually
Yeah.
push that. You guys
Yeah.
100%.
deserve a
Well,
Purple Heart for that.
well,
I mean, the guys down in Fort Hood got shot. They got a Purple Heart
yeah.
because
Yeah,
that
and the
crazy bastard.
recruiters in Little Rock and the recruiters in Tennessee, they got them too. It's only the only people, the only Marines and Army and Navy guys that they refuse to recognize are the Oklahoma City bombing ones. And I mean, even the 9/11 got them, and so
That's a shame.
I don't know why that happened, but it did, and it
Yeah.
still stands today.
Well, if you know Ronnie Jackson or your congressman from somewhere in Oklahoma or Texas, that's something that we
Hmm.
need to organize for. This is kind of
Sure.
cool. This is your wings and your ribbon set
Oh wow.
that
Yeah.
is up at the headquarters, National Marine
Yeah.
Corps
So
Museum.
yeah, let me tell you about this. This is, like you said, it's my blood-soaked ribbons and wings that I was wearing that day, and I donated all of my Oklahoma City memorabilia to the National Museum of the Marine Corps. And so, if you find yourself in Quantico, Virginia, and you find yourself there at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, then you'll find my wings and that stuff there, in the telling of the Marine Corps story. And then along with that too, Mitch, next month I'm flying out to Okinawa. I'm going to be the guest of honor at the First Marine Aircraft Wing ball this year,
So cool.
and so I'm going to be telling the same story there, but then I'm going to be telling it to the young Marines that are on the front lines there in
Yeah.
Okinawa, and so I'm really looking forward for that.
Well, you and your beautiful wife, Jamie, there she
Mm,
is right there at the memorial. That they did a really nice job on that memorial, by the
it's
way.
beautiful.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it was incredible. Well, please give your wife a hug for me. And she was always so sweet and took great care of us. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
you guys making meals and taking care of the single guys back in the day.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And your family is awesome. Tell your son. I hope he's watching.
Yep.
It is let's see, like
Yeah. So
8:30
yeah.
in the
So
morning, 7:30 in the morning over there.
yeah, it's somewhere. And yeah, so he recently picked up major in the Marine Corps, and
Awesome.
he's the assistant comptroller for First Marine Aircraft Wing.
Oh
That's
So
wow,
awesome.
that's
that's how I got to go out there. Right, my grandkids are out there, so you
so
know.
you have to salute your son now. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Hey,
not going to happen.
yeah, hey, Randy, if you need a bodyguard to Okinawa or escort, I'll be glad to go with you. I'm sure I can
Hey,
handle it.
hey,
No, I
Randy, make sure you
appreciate that.
wear your EGAs and make sure
Yeah,
that they're
Oh
floated
yeah,
inboard. Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
that's funny.
That's right. Yeah, that is
And
funny.
Don't be
hey, look
telling
at this.
secrets.
Look at
Yeah.
found this old picture
That's
of this
that's
stud.
a
There
young.
you are wearing
There's a young.
your
Oh,
flak
there you
jacket.
go.
That's my young
All
hard
right.
charger right there. Yeah, it's a flak jacket I wore, and that's a 155 round. Yep, we were in 29
Yeah.
Palms that picture. Yep, that was back when
Yeah.
I could, what was it? Drink gasoline, piss fire. So we were all young once, right?
Yep.
Back in the
Well,
day.
Back in the
well,
way
got
day.
Bruce's very sobering show. God bless you both.
Yeah,
I agree.
Hmm.
Well,
yeah,
gents, it's been an hour and a half, and I try to keep it under an hour. But you know what? This was moving. It was great. As we spoke about, need to keep this fresh on people's minds, even though
absolutely,
we're
100%.
coming up on 30 years, man.
I'm not that
Randy's,
old. What are you talking about?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'll be 58. I'm feeling old now, man.
Ooh,
Yeah. Well, listen, Randy, Doug, I can't even begin to thank you both for taking the time out of your evening, coming on here and sharing your story with us.
it was an honor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mitch, thank you for putting this forum together
Yes,
and continuing to tell the story.
yes, thank
Well,
you.
you know what? Well, it's on live. If you guys watch this, it's too late now, probably, because somebody probably get through about 30 minutes of it. But if you are sticking through to the end, if you like it, subscribe, share this with your friends. This is something needs to kind of be told. So
100%.
we keep as I got the picture of Sergeant Davis and Randy Guzman there. There we
Mm,
go. As we remember those guys,
yes, sir.
we can basically we can basically make sure that their memories are never faded. And as long as we talk about them and remember and say their names, like Horrocks, Rocks, and all the folks that died on the 9/11. Well, you know what? They remain alive in our hearts. Well,
100%.
guys, I'm going to drop you off. Stay with me 1 minute. I'll be right back with you. And to everybody else, thank you for hanging out with us for an hour and a half.
Aye, sir.
You guys got any saved rounds?
Hoorah.
Yeah.
Hoorah. Hoorah. Randy?
Hoorah. Hoorah.
All right.
Hoorah.
All right. Stick around. Hold on a sec. Well, folks, thanks again for joining us. Until next week. Adios, hasta luego, sa wiedersehen, tschüss, sheshe ni, au revoir, domo arigato gozaimasu, tando shinde kudasai. Ciao, rivedici, tashakura, assalamu alaikum, mahala, novidjenya, das vidanya. And I'm going to do this for our out. Boom. See ya.